and it's really a joy to get to speak with y'all tonight. I know that this is a songwriter group, but I thought that I would lean into a songwriting tangential subject of recording um, a bit tonight. My own story is I've been writing songs and recording them for about 17 or 18 years now. When I was in middle school, I got um, a little device called a gearbox, which was like an early cheap interface, and this program called Sony Acid, and made recordings at my parents' house with my garage band in middle school. And ever since then, I feel like when I'm writing a song, I'm always sort of thinking about is this a song that could eventually be recorded? And I'm just curious. I know that we all come at this conversation kind of in different places, but could I just get a show of hands who has recorded some music, whether that's at a professional studio or in your home? Cool. And who has some kind of home studio setup? I know I can see them in your. Yeah, great. Who has never recorded anything, if you're comfortable to share that? I'm sure you've at least recorded a voice memo, and I will say that that is a recording too. Um, I kind of uh, begrudgingly over the last couple years have started to think of myself as a producer, and I think that scared me at first because I've never actually gotten the chance to record in a traditional studio setting. I've never really recorded with a full band all at the same time. But like I said, I have been doing home studio recording for a long time now, and over the last 3 or 4 years have gotten to produce several artists from the Art House Dallas community and other friends. And at least two of them are on this call, Graham and Brian. It's good to see y'all. And so I'll just be sharing from some of that experience, getting to produce other artists, and hopefully give some tips that, regardless of where all of us are on this journey, might be helpful. Um, when I think of what a producer is, I just kind of want to demystify that. And I really think that producing a song is simply getting a song from the place that we're all bringing a song to tonight. An idea or even a fully formed song that you can play on an instrument in real time and maybe record on your phone, a quick voice memo. But it's not really ready to be shared on streaming or Spotify. You can't listen to it in the car. And there's so many different ways to get a song from that place to the place where people can hear it. And I guess I just want to encourage you that if you're able to do that, then that label producer, I would say, is for you as well. And I say that because in the last, I would say, 20 years, and I think even more going forward, more and more artists are going to be artists and producers, and that gap between the two, in my opinion, is getting smaller, mostly because of computers and cheaper audio equipment. And I think this is really exciting. I think we're in kind of a renaissance for recorded music. I don't know if any of y'all watched the Get Back Beatles documentary on Disney. But I remember some shots in that showed the recording engineers who were dressed up very fancy. They looked totally different than the Beatles. And that was pretty common, 50, 60, 70 years ago, for recording engineers to be first and foremost engineers and to bring in talent. And oftentimes the talent didn't really understand what was happening in the studio. And that has continued. I've had friends that have gotten to record albums in a traditional space and didn't really have the vocabulary to advocate for themselves and make the kind of art that they wanted to make. So I'm just going to give a few kind of tips that I think of a lot when I'm recording, and hopefully they'll be helpful. The last thing, by way of introduction, was the two songs that we listened to when we were waiting to start, um, are by Sufjan Stevens and Bon Iver, and I think it's fascinating. But both the albums, Michigan and For Emma, were recorded with this mic, a Shure SM57, which is um, less than $100 mic, usually used on drums, but they used it on vocals, guitar, piano, everything. And so um, trust your ears, not your gear. I need to remember that often. That it's not about the next piece of equipment you buy, but what you do with it. One piece that a lot of these things are things I need to learn, and I would say that treating a recording, whether you're making a demo at home or going into a studio or making a serious project at home, treat it like a performance. I need to remind myself to practice, not only for playing out at a gig, which I'm pretty used to, and I get massive stage fright, so I have to practice a lot. But there's this thing called red light fever too. If any of y'all have recorded and kind of panicked and felt like I knew how to play that until you hit record, you know what I mean. And so practice for a recording like you'd practice for a show. And maybe that means practicing with a metronome at home if you're not used to playing with a metronome. I know that some bigger churches will use that, but a lot of us, the only time I play to a metronome is when I'm recording. And so get a metronome app on your phone, practice with that. And I'm about to contradict myself because when I record, I hardly ever actually use just a metronome. I like to find some kind of drum beat or loop. I use Apple Logic, and it's very easy to make a drum beat to play to. And I love this because when I'm actually playing music in the real world, I'm not playing with a metronome. I'm playing with people and oftentimes with some kind of percussionist. And so anything that you can do in recording to make it feel um, not like something else besides music, but like the music that you play when you're playing a gig or writing or playing music in any other capacity. And if you don't have a program that can generate drums for you, I suggest investing in some hand percussion. I've used little egg shakers, and this is a kashishi, which is a wonderful snare drum sound if you mess with it a little bit. And sometimes just a little beat that I'll make to record scratch tracks to ends up becoming the actual drum track for the song. That was true of a hymn arrangement that I just released yesterday, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. The scratch track drums, which I had planned to replace and hire a drummer to play, I ended up kind of falling in love with them and just kept them as they were. And I was encouraged to do that by Charlie Peacock when he produced the record for the Civil Wars. They're self-titled. There's a song called Dust to Dust, and if you listen to that, there's a drum beat throughout the whole song. And I've heard him talk about how that was basically their click track. It's just a simple drum machine that they had planned to get rid of, and it ended up sticking. And so you're never gonna, or probably never gonna leave a metronome on your song, but you might leave some kind of percussion track. Another tip would be just to, you don't need a click track. I know Brian Nixon is in the chat tonight. We did a few songs for his record that weren't to click at all. And I think I grew up with these certain rules at what you could and couldn't do with recording, multi-track recording. And I thought that you couldn't do multi-track recording if you didn't have some kind of time reference. But that's not true. Some songs don't really want to be strapped down and chained up. Another Art House Dallas artist, Nick Schrader, writes these wonderful songs with varying meters and tempo changes. And we found that having him perform his keys and vocals at the same time, not to a click, gave us the most authentic sound. I'm kind of embarrassed by this next tip because y'all probably already know about it, but I didn't know about this trick until just a few years ago. But double tracking, which is just what it sounds like, singing the same thing twice or playing the same thing twice. I find that this is especially effective with electric guitar, sometimes acoustic guitar, and definitely vocals, and especially background vocals. And it's all over the place. If you listen to music, a song that'll sound huge and it feels like there's so much going on. Oftentimes, there's not really that many parts happening, but they've been played twice and sometimes panned far to the left and far to the right. And especially when you're making a demo at home and you're just capturing one instrument and one voice, it's a great way to make a song sound more three-dimensional. And also, I try to sing everything without a double vocal, but then the songs that are the hardest to sing, I find the double can kind of cover a multitude of wrong notes sometimes. Um, I just released a song, another hymn arrangement, We Walk by Faith and Not by Sight, and the entire vocal and all the background vocals are doubled as well. And I believe Anna will be posting a link in the chat at some point to all the songs I'm mentioning. Let's see. My next tip is maybe my favorite one, that I got to work with a really wonderful drummer a few years back on a few different projects, Aaron Sterling in LA, and we worked remotely sending songs back and forth. And he was just such a huge help for me in my recording journey, because I sent him scratch tracks, and I kept apologizing for, the guitar at this measure is not quite with the click track. And he said, don't worry about it. It sounds like music. And he played to what I sent him. And he also taught me a lot about uh, just trying things and thinking outside the box. He would run his snare drum through guitar effects pedals, sometimes the whole drum set through stomp boxes. And I just thought that was so fun. And so since working with him, I've tried doing things I normally wouldn't do, running an acoustic guitar through guitar effects pedals and an amp, maybe vocals. Um, got this little keyboard from the 80s that's like a toy keyboard, and you can record your voice into it and play your voice back on the keyboard. Um, I'm just always looking for ways to making music feel fun and not like a chore or not like a science experiment. I remember hearing John Foreman from Switchfoot talk about how they would find the cheapest pawn shop guitar they could find and record it through the most expensive mic they could find, or the other way around. They'd find their best instrument and record it through a mic from Radio Shack, just to see what kind of sounds they could get. So those are some kind of just general tips that I've found useful, things that I come back to a lot. But my overall kind of way of thinking about recording is really not that different from the way I think about arranging. And I think what's cool about multi-track recording is you're not only wearing a producer hat, but you're wearing an arranger hat. If you're recording most of your instruments at home, or even if you're sending files to somebody else to have them play on it, there's this sense that you're building a song that if you had five or six people in a room, you might be able to build that arrangement in real time. But you can do it in a studio setting too. And I remember hearing Ben Shive, a producer in Nashville, a few years back, talk about how he thinks about things as needing to be familiar but fresh, which is really um, not a new idea at all. The classical composers who were making symphonies would have several melodies or motifs, and they would bring back these motifs with different rhythms in different keys. They'd change the chords. And so this idea is just how we're trained to experience music. We want to hear something familiar, but in a new way as the piece progresses. One way that I've started to think about it is thinking about arranging as a 3D visual. Um, so I think of up and down as being pitch, high and low. Left and right, obviously stereo, which we notice the most with headphones on. And then kind of front and back, I like to think of things being either foreground or background or somewhere in between. And that could be due to volume differences. For something to feel loud, like a lead vocal or a drum set, you need to have other things that feel softer, often keyboards, guitars, bass. And another way to think about that kind of front back dimension is reverb, in the place of how wet and how dry things are in a song. And so I think about those when I think about that familiar but fresh way, or another way I think about it is contrast. Maybe the verse is has a pretty small scale of pitches. Maybe there's not a bass guitar yet. Maybe there's not a really high chimey instrument on the verse. But when the chorus hits, those things enter and it feels bigger all of a sudden. Or maybe I do that with the left and right. Maybe the verse is kind of small and concise and mostly panned toward the middle. And by the time the chorus hits, things get wider and more expansive. Or maybe I play with that background and I put something reverby in the back in a place where I want something to feel less urgent or a little more mysterious, and I dry things up when I want them to feel more in your face. I want to remind you all and remind myself that you don't have to add things to make things different. The fresh often can come from taking things out. There's kind of the classic third chorus or third verse where everything drops down and then you build back up. I think that works so well because our ears are trained to want something different by that point in the song. Sometimes bridges can have a similar function. My last tip with that contrast piece is just to I've heard other people in these gatherings talk about this before, but to shoot for around 3.5 minutes, as silly as that sounds. And some songs are going to be over that, some songs are going to be under that. But one of the first things I do when I'm working with a new artist is to figure out how long the song is, and is there a way we could, if it's 6 minutes, could we get it to 5.5 minutes? I try to do that with my own songs too. Is there a way to get them closer to that 3.5 minutes, which just seems like kind of a conventional um, place that our ear, we don't get bored typically with a 3.5 minute song. I'm packing a lot in here, but I'm almost done. Um, this last tip is for the one or two of you that have not recorded anything, but it's also for all of us. I encourage you to make a catalog of reference tracks, which is really just songs that you like, songs that you think your music might sound like, songs that you aspire for your music to sound like. I'm always chasing my taste, which is always way ahead of what I can actually make myself. But I'm listening for those tastemakers, those artists I like, and I'm trying to figure out what I like about their songs. Is it the vocal sound? Is it the percussion? Is it the harmony? Is it the melody? I try to make a list of my favorite songs or the most inspiring songs and figure out exactly what's inspiring about them. That's helpful not just for yourself, but if you end up working with other musicians or with a producer, that's a way to translate your vision in a tangible way to the person you're working with, or to yourself if you end up recording and producing your own music. Some final thoughts. Again, I just want to kind of go back to the beginning of what I said, that there's no right way to make a record. Some of my favorite records, like the Sufjan Michigan album, were recorded the wrong way on a number of fronts. He recorded that album at a insufficient bit rate, which I don't understand that part of recording, but if you read in this magazine Tape Op, he kind of blew everybody's minds because he recorded that album at 16-bit instead of 24, which is standard. And so in theory, it was he was losing a lot of information by recording it that way, but I think it kind of served to give it the sound that it has. Similarly, my good friend here in Dallas, David Belt, recorded a beautiful song called "Applause" that I find deeply moving. And I asked him who he recorded it with, how he did it, and he said that he did it on his iPad. The entire song recorded, mixed, mastered on his iPad, which made me very angry, but also I stand in awe of his talents because I think that sounds incredible. So that's on the playlist too. And finally, the Civil Wars, I'll mention again, have a song on that self-titled called "Darlin" that ends the record, which was recorded on an iPhone. And that's kind of a thing right now to record, put things up on a record and say iPhone recording. But they didn't even say it. It was just in the liner notes of the record. And I think that's because regardless of how it was made, they produced that song to sound good, to sound like it needed to sound. And so whether you're recording in a big studio or at your home like me, or even just on your phone, I just encourage you to remember that this is art, and there is a science to frequencies. There's a science to acoustics. There's certainly a science to music, but at the end of the day, the part that tugs at our heartstrings is the artistry of it. And I hope that you'll find ways to do that in a way that makes sense. And I hope that we can all keep putting out more beauty into the world. So thank you for listening to me chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. I'm going to stop this recording and